They say the lantern guides the lost, but here...
The first time I heard a human being torn apart, I was standing in a room that cost more than every dollar I'd earn in my lifetime, holding a tray of still warm edamame. Let me back up. My name is Joel Parrish. Am, I suppose, a house manager. That's the polite title. The real job was something between concierge, confessor, and ghost. For 11 months, I'd managed the private residence of Marcus Whitfield, founder of Helios Dynamics. Net worth somewhere between 6 and 9 billion, depending on which magazine you believed. His primary home sat on 4 acres above the Pacific Palisades, a cantilevered glass and poured concrete monument to the idea that money could buy silence. 3 stories, 11 bathrooms, a gym with an ocean view that Marcus used maybe twice, a wine cellar climate-controlled to 4 separate zones, and beneath the master suite, accessed through a biometric panel disguised as a thermostat, a safe room that I had entered exactly once during my orientation, and had thought about every single day since. Marcus wasn't home. That's the part that matters. Marcus hadn't been home in 6 weeks. He was in Zurich, then Singapore, then a private island near Fiji, whose name I was contractually forbidden from speaking aloud. I managed the house in his absence, which was most of the time. I managed Lena, the housekeeper who came Tuesdays and Fridays. I managed the landscaping crew, the pool service, the grocery deliveries from a boutique market in Brentwood that delivered high mineral water in glass bottles and high-protein snacks Marcus's nutritionist selected remotely. I managed the security system, a Crestron-integrated smart home platform called Haven that controlled every lock, camera, shutter, and climate zone in the building. I wore a small fob on my belt that gave me access to every room except one. The safe room required Marcus's biometric authorization, thumbprint and retinal scan. That was the rule. That was supposed to be absolute. It was a Wednesday, October 15th. The news had been strange for about a week. Scattered reports from Eastern Europe. Something in Seoul that the networks kept calling in uncontrolled civil disturbance. Footage out of Lagos that YouTube kept pulling and re-uploading. I wasn't paying close attention. You have to understand, when you work inside a house like Marcus Whitfield's, the outside world becomes a kind of weather system. You're aware of it. You dress for it. But the glass is thick and the walls are deep, and your job is to make sure the interior remains undisturbed. Lena was in the kitchen with me. She was 54, Salvadoran, practical in the way that people who've survived actual hardship tend to be, and she'd stopped trusting the news 3 days earlier. "Something is wrong with this," she kept saying, gesturing at her phone. "This isn't protests. Look at how they move." I told her I was sure it would be contained. I remember the exact words because of how stupid they sound now. "It's on the other side of the world, Lena. By tomorrow, the National Guard will have it sorted." That was at 2:15 in the afternoon. At 2:41, Lena's daughter called from Glendale screaming, and the call dropped after 9 seconds. At 2:43, I pulled up the exterior security cameras on the kitchen console and saw a man on Sunset Boulevard, 600 feet below the property's front gate, walking in a direction that wasn't quite a direction. He moved the way a shopping cart rolls when you let go of it on a slope, purposeful in momentum, absent in intent. Then a woman ran across the intersection, and he changed course instantly, covering the distance between them at a speed that made my hands go cold on the granite countertop. Lena saw it too. Neither of us said anything. We just watched. At 2:47, the Haven system chimed a tone I'd never heard before. 3 ascending notes, then a flat hum, and every window shutter in the house began to descend simultaneously. The shutters were steel core composite. Marcus had them installed after a wildfire scare 2 years before I started. They sealed against rubber gaskets, floor to ceiling. And when they closed, the house went from a glass pavilion to a concrete sarcophagus in about 45 seconds. The interior lights shifted automatically to a warm amber meant to simulate natural light, which only made the sudden darkness feel more intentional, like the house had been waiting for permission to become what it really was. I grabbed my fob and swiped the kitchen console to check the security log. The Haven system had activated something called Protocol Kestrel. I'd never seen that name before. It wasn't in any of the manuals I'd been given. The log showed it had been triggered remotely. An authorization from a device registered to Marcus Whitfield, sent from an IP address geolocated somewhere over the Pacific Ocean. He was on his plane. He'd activated the lockdown from 40,000 feet. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I recognized as his assistant's satellite line. Kestrel active. Safe room unlocked for 10 minutes. Get inside. Do not open for anyone. I read it twice. Lena was already on her phone again, trying to reach her daughter, pacing near the refrigerator with one hand pressed to her mouth. I showed her the text. She read it, looked at me, and said, "Where is this room?" The safe room was beneath the master suite on the second floor. I'd been inside it once, 11 months ago, when Marcus's head of security, a former Secret Service agent named Royce, walked me through the house systems. It was roughly 400 square feet, reinforced concrete walls 18 inches thick, with a Faraday cage embedded in the structure. Independent air filtration. A water tank fed by the house's main line, but with a manual shutoff and 60-day reserve. Food stores I hadn't inventoried, but which Royce had described as sufficient for one occupant, extended duration. A communications array. A single entrance. A vault-grade steel door concealed behind what appeared to be a closet wall in the master bedroom. Designed for one occupant, Marcus Whitfield had built himself a lifeboat. The text on my phone was telling me to use it, and I had 10 minutes. Now, probably 7. Before whatever remote authorization he'd triggered expired and the biometric lock re-engaged. "We need to go now," I told Lena. She stopped pacing. "My daughter." "Lena, we need to go now, and I need you to come with me. I have to get to Glendale." I pulled up the exterior cameras again. The view down toward sunset showed at least a dozen figures now, some moving fast, some standing motionless in positions that living people don't hold. Angled forward, heads cocked at degrees that suggested the muscles in their necks were no longer responding to the same signals as ours. A car had jumped the median and was burning silently, or at least silently to us behind the shutters. The Palisades neighborhood streets leading down the hill were empty in a way that made them look like they'd been empty for years, not minutes. "You won't make it to Glendale," I said, and hated how calm my voice sounded. "Not right now, maybe later. But right now, we need to get to the safe room before it locks again." Lena looked at me with an expression I still carry. Not anger, not fear, but the particular devastation of a mother doing arithmetic. The distance to her daughter versus the seconds on a clock versus the things on the street below. She put her phone in her apron pocket and followed me up the stairs. We made it with what must have been 2 minutes to spare. The closet wall in the master bedroom had already slid open. Haven responding to the Kestrel protocol, revealing the vault door behind it. I pressed my fob to the panel beside it, and the door released with a sound like a pressurized cabin equalizing. Heavy, dense, final. Lena stepped inside first. I followed. The door closed behind us with a hydraulic whisper, and something in the frame engaged. A series of bolts seeding into recesses with mechanical certainty. The sound was the most expensive thing I'd ever heard. Then silence. Absolute architectural silence. We stood in a dead man's ark, though we didn't know he was dead yet. The room was smaller than I remembered, or maybe it just felt that way with two people inside a space designed with the assumption that extreme survival is a solo activity. The lighting was recessed LED, soft and shadowless, the kind of illumination that makes everything look like a product rendering. The walls were bare concrete, smooth to an almost tactile warmth. Against the far wall sat a built-in cot, single, naturally, with memory foam and vacuum-sealed bedding. Beside it, a compact toilet and sink behind a partial privacy wall. The air smelled faintly of ozone and new plastic. Lena walked the perimeter in about 12 steps and stopped at the supply shelves. They ran the full length of the left wall, floor to ceiling, organized with the same precision Marcus applied to everything. Freeze-dried meals in labeled containers. 360 of them, I'd count later. Water purification tablets. A medical kit that would have embarrassed most urgent care clinics. 6 cases of high-calorie protein bars. Batteries. A hand crank radio. 2 flashlights, both lithium-ion with solar charging cradles. A paper binder 3 inches thick, labeled Haven Integration, Safe Room Manual. And in a locked drawer near the communications console, a 9mm handgun with 4 loaded magazines. "This is for one person," Lena said quietly. She wasn't accusing me, she was measuring. "I know. 360 meals. That's 1 year for one person. Or 6 months for 2. She nodded slowly, accepting the math without comment. Then she sat on the floor, not the cot, the floor, and tried her daughter's number again. No signal. The Faraday cage did exactly what it was designed to do. It made us invisible to the electromagnetic world, and the electromagnetic world invisible to us. But the room had its own communications system. A hardwired console, mounted to the wall near the door, ran on a dedicated fiber optic line. Buried in the foundation, Marcus's head of security had explained it during my orientation. The line connected to a private uplink on the roof, separate from the house's standard internet, designed to survive grid failure for as long as the backup generators held. I powered it on. The screen booted to a simple interface, text-based messaging, an audio channel, and a feed from the house's external cameras. The cameras showed me what 6 minutes had done to the Palisades. The street below the property had become something I don't have adequate language for. Not a battlefield. Battlefields have sides, not a disaster zone. Disasters have edges. What I saw was more like watching a system crash. People running. People not running anymore. A woman crawling across a lawn, dragging one leg behind her. And I couldn't tell if she was fleeing or hunting until she reached the man crouched behind a planter box. And I watched her pull him into the grass by his collar and lower her mouth toward his throat. And I turned off that camera. "We're inside," I said to Lena. "We're sealed. The air is filtered. The door is rated against vehicle impact. We're inside." She wasn't listening. She was staring at the wall like she could see through it to Glendale. I understood. Being safe when the people you love aren't is its own particular violence. I opened the binder. Marcus Whitfield, or more likely the team he'd paid very well, had thought of everything. The manual detailed the room's systems with engineering precision, air recycling rates, water reservoir capacity, caloric burn calculations, waste management protocols, page after page of contingencies for a man who never arrived to use them. There was a section on psychological maintenance, recommended daily routines, exercise protocols achievable in limited space, even a small library of loaded ebooks on a dedicated tablet. At the back of the binder, in a section marked Personal, owner only, I found a sealed envelope. I didn't open it then. I would later, and it would change everything. But that first night, I just sat on the concrete floor across from Lena, listening to the silence of a room that was keeping us alive, and wondered whether the man who built it was somewhere equally safe. He wasn't. We'd learned that his plane never landed. The cameras became our addiction and our punishment. There were 14 of them, 8 exterior, covering the property perimeter and the street approaches, and 6 interior, showing the empty rooms of the house above us like a museum after closing. I checked them compulsively that first night, cycling through feeds every few minutes, unable to stop and unable to keep watching. By midnight, the streets were different. The initial chaos, the running, the screaming that we could see but not hear through the camera feeds, had settled into something worse. Stillness. The infected didn't sleep exactly, but they entered a kind of stasis when there was nothing to pursue. They stood in yards, on sidewalks, in the middle of intersections, their postures wrong in ways I couldn't always articulate. One stood beneath a streetlight that was still functioning, and the light caught the angle of its jaw, which hung lower on one side than biology should allow. Another had positioned itself near the front gate of the property next door, facing the house, not moving, not leaving, just oriented toward the last place it had heard something alive. Lena slept in 3-hour intervals and then sat up abruptly each time, reaching for her phone before remembering. I gave her the communications console and showed her how to switch to AM radio bands. Most of the local stations were dead air or emergency loops. The same FEMA recording cycling every 90 seconds, advising shelter in place, advising calm, advising things that the cameras proved no one could follow. But she found a ham radio operator broadcasting from somewhere in the San Fernando Valley, a man who identified himself as Victor, K6VHR, and who was calmly reporting what he could see from his roof. "Glendale is dark," he said at one point, his voice flat with exhaustion. "Power went around 9. I can see fires near the 134. If you're in Glendale, I hope you're underground." Lena pressed her palm flat against the console speaker and held it there, as if she could reach through the frequency. I gave her the cot that night. She refused twice, and I insisted. And eventually she lay down with her shoes on, and her apron still tied. And I think that detail, the apron, the readiness to return to work that would never exist again, was the thing that finally broke something in my chest. I sat at the console and read the manual. I read it cover to cover, slowly, the way you read scripture when you need the world to make structural sense. I learned that the air filtration system could operate for 90 days on battery backup alone, that the water reserve held 410 gallons, that the food stores included a vitamin supplement regimen calculated to prevent deficiency over 12 months of isolation. Marcus had hired a firm. The manual named them Castellan Risk Solutions, to design this room as a closed system, a life support module for one human being, detached from every supply chain, every grid, every dependency. The manual's tone was clinical, optimistic in a corporate way. The occupant should experience minimal degradation of physical health during the rated shelter period. Minimal degradation, as if health were only physical. As if the thing that degrades first in isolation isn't the body, but the certainty that you deserve to be the one who's safe. I started a log, paper from a notebook I found in the supply shelf. I wrote the date, the time, the names of every person I could see on the cameras who was still alive. That first night, I counted 7. A family of 4 barricaded in a house 3 lots down. I could see their flashlights through windows. A man on a roof 2 blocks south. 2 figures moving together through a backyard, fast, hunched, clearly human by their coordination. By the next morning, I counted 3. Day 2 brought the intercom. I hadn't realized the house had an exterior intercom. A visitor call box at the front gate that connected to Haven and through the Kestrel protocol, routed directly to the safe room console. At 6:14 in the morning, it activated with a pop of static, and a voice came through that turned my blood into something cold and slow. Hello? Is someone? Can anyone in there hear me? Please, please, I have my son with me. He's 9. Please, if anyone is inside, we can see the shutters are closed. We know someone is in there. Please. A woman. Young, maybe early 30s. The kind of voice that hasn't finished being afraid yet and is still trying to assemble words in a logical order. Behind her, faintly, a child's breathing. Fast, shallow, a metronome of terror. I looked at Lena. She was already awake, already standing, already staring at the console, with an expression that made her look like she was facing a jury. I switched to the gate camera. A woman in a gray hoodie, dark hair pulled back, holding the hand of a boy in a school uniform. They were pressed against the gate's keypad alcove, partially shielded from the street. The boy's face was buried in his mother's side. Beyond them, maybe 200 feet down the hill, 3 infected stood in the middle of the road in their terrible stillness. They can't get in the gate, I said. The gate is steel, electronic lock. It won't open without... Open it, Lena said. Lena, even if I open the gate, the house is in lockdown. The shutters are sealed. I can't... Open the gate. Get them inside the grounds. The grounds have the wall. She was right. The property wall was 8 feet of reinforced concrete, topped with architectural mesh. If I opened the gate and closed it behind them, they'd be inside the perimeter, not inside the house, not inside the safe room, but behind a wall. The woman's voice came through again. I can see the camera moving. I know you're watching. Please. His name is Oliver. He's 9 years old and he hasn't eaten since yesterday. And there are things on the street that I can't. Please. I pressed the gate release. On the camera, I watched the gate slide open. Watched the woman pull her son through. Watched the gate close behind them. One of the 3 infected on the road turned its head at the sound of the motor. It didn't approach, not yet. The woman looked up at the camera and mouthed, "Thank you." And I felt something I can only describe as the opposite of relief. The knowledge that I had just made a decision that would keep branching, keep requiring more decisions, each one heavier than the last. Her name was Tessa Nguyen. Her son was Oliver. They'd walked from a house on Castellamare Drive, almost 2 miles through the night, following the walls of properties, staying off open streets. She was an ER nurse at UCLA Medical. She'd been off shift when it started and had driven to Oliver's school and pulled him out of an aftercare program 12 minutes before the school went into a lockdown it would never come out of. They'd sheltered in their house until the sounds drove them out. Not the infected outside, she'd tell me later, but the ones that got into the neighbor's house through a pet door. The sounds through the shared wall. I couldn't bring them inside the house. I couldn't bring them to the safe room. But I could talk to them through the intercom, and I could watch them on the cameras. And when I saw Tessa trying to break into the pool house using a landscaping rock, I used Haven to unlock the pool house door remotely. The pool house had a small bathroom, a daybed, a mini fridge that still had power. It wasn't a safe room, but it was a roof, and it was inside the wall. Lena watched me do all of this without speaking. When I was done, she said, 2 more people. The food is now 4 months instead of 6. They're not eating our food. They're in the pool house. Today they are. Lena was right, of course. She was right about everything, and always approximately 12 hours before I was willing to admit it. By day 3, I was routing supplies from the house to the pool house. Haven gave me control of the interior doors, and through a series of unlocking sequences, I mapped a path from the kitchen to the rear service exit without exposing anyone to the outside. Shutters stayed down. Doors opened and closed in sequence. I made the run myself the first time, moving through Marcus Whitfield's dark, amber-lit house like a burglar in reverse. Carrie Savas, towering canned goods from the kitchen pantry and bottled water from the garage stores. The house itself had enough food for weeks. Marcus's nutritionist kept it perpetually stocked. But every can I moved from the house to the pool house was a can that wasn't going to the safe room reserve. And every step I took through the house was a minute I spent outside the room that was actually designed to keep me alive. Tessa and I talked through the intercom system. Her voice became familiar quickly. Clipped, precise, the diction of someone trained to deliver critical information under pressure. She assessed Oliver's condition like a clinician. Hydrated, fed, no injuries, mild shock, sleeping in 90-minute cycles. She assessed her own condition the same way, and the clinical detachment in her self-report told me more about her psychological state than any confession would have. "The pool house door," she said on the evening of day 3. "It's a standard residential lock. If one of those things hits it hard enough." I know. You know. And you're in a bunker. I know that too. Silence, then. "I'm not guilting you. I'm making a tactical observation. If we're going to die out here, that's one thing. But if you have the ability to get us somewhere more secure and you're choosing not to, I need to understand why, so I can plan accordingly." She was right. And the why was simple and ugly. The safe room was designed for 1. It was feeding 2. It could not feed 4. Not for the duration that might be required. Everybody I added subtracted months from the endgame arithmetic. And I was beginning to understand that the endgame might be measured in months. "Let me think," I said. "Think fast." Oliver found a gap in the pool house window screen. He didn't say anything for an hour because he didn't want to scare me. He'd been watching one of them standing next to the pool, just standing there, staring at the water. I checked the pool camera. She was right. An infected male, maybe 60 years old, standing at the shallow end with his feet in the overflow channel, motionless, head tilted downward. Something about the water held its attention. The movement, maybe, or the reflection. It wasn't trying to get in. It was just there, present, patient in a way that didn't require thought. That night, I opened the sealed envelope from the back of the manual. I told myself it was because I needed information. But really it was because I needed permission from the man who built this room. From someone with more authority than a house manager who'd been trusted with keys. The letter inside was handwritten. Marcus Whitfield's script was small and angular, the writing of a man who'd learned penmanship but resented the time it took. "If you're reading this, I didn't make it. The room is yours now, not legally. My attorneys will sort that out if there's still a legal system. But practically, you're inside. That's what matters. The room was built for me because I believed survival was a resource allocation problem. I still believe that. But I also know that resource allocation requires a single decision maker with absolute authority over distribution. That's why the room is for 1. Not because I'm selfish, because committees don't survive. One person decides who eats, who enters, who stays. If you compromise that, you compromise the math. And the math is the only thing keeping the air clean and the water flowing. Be the one. Don't feel guilty about it. Guilt is a resource leak. I read it 3 times. Then I folded it and put it back in the envelope, and sat with the particular nausea of being told by a dead billionaire that my survival depended on becoming him. On day 5, I let Tessa and Oliver into the safe room. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was an exhausted one. The infected near the pool had multiplied to 3. And on the 4th night, one of them had walked directly into the pool house's glass door hard enough to crack it. Tessa had pulled Oliver into the bathroom and barricaded the door with the daybed and called me on the intercom with a voice so controlled it terrified me. No panic, no pleading, just, "The glass won't hold a second impact. We need to move. Tell me the path." I walked them through the house using the Haven-controlled doors and the camera feeds as my eyes. Tessa carried Oliver on her hip, even though he was really too big for it. And she moved through the darkened hallways with the economy of someone who understood triage. Don't look around. Don't assess the decor. Don't think about anything except the next doorway. I unlocked each door 2 seconds before they reached it and locked it 2 seconds after they passed through. The sequence took 4 minutes. They arrived at the master bedroom closet, breathing hard, and I opened the vault door from inside. Oliver looked at me with eyes that had gotten older since the last time I'd seen him on camera. He was holding a pool house towel against his chest like a stuffed animal. He didn't say anything. He just walked in, looked at the cot, looked at the supplies on the shelves, and sat down on the floor in the corner nearest the air vent. "Thank you," Tessa said. And then immediately, "How long does the food last with 4 people?" "About 3 months." "What happens at 3 months?" "I don't know yet." She nodded as if this were a lab result. Noted, filed, insufficient, but acknowledged. Then she turned to Lena and introduced herself with her full name and credentials, the way medical professionals do when they're establishing a chain of competence, and within 20 minutes, the 2 of them had reorganized the food stores into a rationing system that I wouldn't have thought of in a week. The room changed with 4 people in it. The silence that had felt protective became pressurized. 4 bodies meant more CO2. Faster water consumption, a toilet that needed attention more often. It meant negotiating sleep schedules on a single cot. Oliver and Tessa took it in shared shifts. Lena and I alternated on the floor with folded emergency blankets. It meant the smell of 4 people in a sealed space, which the air filtration handled technically, but which you could still sense in a primal, mammalian way. We were too many animals in too small a den. But it also meant something I hadn't expected. Competence. Tessa was an ER nurse, which meant she understood systems under stress. Within 2 days, she'd audited the medical kit, established a hygiene protocol, and created a schedule that gave each of us designated time at the communications console. Lena had managed households for 20 years and applied the same principles. Rotation, delegation, maintenance, to 400 square feet of bunker. Oliver, once he started talking again on day 7, turned out to be intensely observant and mechanically curious, and I gave him the Haven manual because keeping his mind occupied was keeping all of us sane. I still checked the cameras. The world outside continued its collapse with the indifferent momentum of gravity. The house above us was intact. The shutters held, the walls held. Marcus Whitfield's investment in architectural paranoia proved its value daily. But the neighborhood beyond the walls had emptied of the living and filled with the other thing. I stopped counting them. Counting implied a problem with a finite number. And this was not that. Day 12 brought the radio call that cracked us open. Victor, the ham operator in the valley, had gone silent on day 8. We'd assumed the worst. But on day 12, a different voice appeared on the frequency. younger, female, broadcasting from what she said was a Coast Guard station on Terminal Island in the port of Long Beach. "This is Lieutenant Ava Caulfield, United States Coast Guard, broadcasting on emergency frequencies. Terminal Island remains secure. We are accepting civilians. Repeat, Terminal Island is accepting civilians. We have power, water, medical, and perimeter defense. If you can reach the Vincent Thomas Bridge approach, we will see you. We are watching the bridge. Do not attempt water approach. Harbor is not secure. Bridge approach only. Broadcasting every 4 hours." Tessa heard it first. She was at the console during her shift, and she played it back for the rest of us on the small speaker. And the 4 of us stood in that bunker and listened to a woman's voice describe a place where people were being gathered and protected. And the effect was physical. I could feel my circulatory system respond, blood moving differently, something in my chest unlocking that I'd bricked shut without realizing. "Terminal Island," Lena said. "That's 40 miles. 35 from here," Tessa corrected. "Through Los Angeles." Through Los Angeles. We looked at each other across the geometry of a room that was keeping us alive and slowly making us less than alive. 3 months of food, 400 square feet, a cot, a toilet, and the knowledge that a dead man had designed this space as a monument to the conviction that survival means never opening the door. "We don't have to decide now," I said. "No," Tessa agreed. "But we have to decide before the food math decides for us." Oliver was sitting on the floor with the Haven manual open in his lap. He'd been reading it methodically, section by section, with the intensity of a child who'd replaced play with purpose. He looked up at his mother, then at me. "The house has a garage," he said. "It does." "What's in it?" I pulled up the interior camera for the garage. On the screen, in the soft amber glow of Haven's emergency lighting, sat Marcus Whitfield's vehicles: a Tesla Model X, a Mercedes G-Wagon, and because billionaires collect things the way the rest of us collect anxieties, a matty black armored Range Rover that Royce had once mentioned was rated to withstand small arms fire and had a reinforced undercarriage designed for unstable terrain. "That one," Oliver said, pointing to the Range Rover with a certainty that made Tessa close her eyes. Nobody laughed. Nobody dismissed a 9-year-old's tactical assessment. Because he was right, and we all knew it. And the only question was whether we were brave enough or desperate enough. And in this room, those words meant the same thing: to stop surviving and start moving. The debate lasted 3 days, not continuous. We couldn't sustain that kind of deliberation in a space where every conversation was overheard and every tension had nowhere to dissipate. But in fragments, in careful exchanges, in the way Lena would say something over a shared meal of rehydrated pasta and then not speak for hours. Lena wanted to go, not to Terminal Island, to Glendale, to her daughter. She'd been carrying this since the first minute, and the weight of it had changed her posture, literally, visibly. She stood slightly bent now, as if walking into a wind only she could feel. Tessa wanted information before commitment. She wanted to raise Lieutenant Caulfield on the radio and confirm details: numbers, defenses, medical capacity. She wanted to know if the route had been traveled, if anyone had made it, if the bridge was genuinely passable. She was an empiricist by training and a mother by priority, and she would not move her son toward hope without evidence. I don't know what I wanted. I think I wanted Marcus Whitfield's letter to be wrong. I wanted the math to not be the only thing that mattered. I wanted to believe that the room could be more than a box for one person's continuity, that it could be a way station, a staging ground, a place people pass through on their way to something larger. Because if it was just a box, then I was just a custodian of a dead man's selfishness. And I'd spent my whole career being exactly that. And I needed this to be different. On day 15, I made contact with Caulfield. The communications console could transmit as well as receive. I'd been hesitant to broadcast, worried about drawing attention. Though from what I understood, the Faraday cage and the dedicated uplink made our signal difficult to locate physically. I waited until Tessa's calculated broadcast window and sent a text-based message on the emergency frequency, identifying ourselves, our location, our number. The response came 90 minutes later, audio. And Lieutenant Caulfield's voice was different when she was speaking to specific people rather than broadcasting to the void. Warmer, more tired. 4 survivors, Pacific Palisades, copy. We have received 11 parties from the West LA corridor. 7 made it. Route advisory. PCH is impassable south of Santa Monica Pier. Vehicle pileup and heavy infected concentration. The 405 is a graveyard. Best route is surface streets through Inglewood, to the 110 south, then Harbor Boulevard to the bridge. It's ugly, but it's passable. We've had vehicles make it in 3 to 5 hours depending on obstacles. The bridge itself is clear. We maintain it. You'll see our lights. 7 out of 11. Tessa looked at me when she heard that number. 63% survival rate on the road. Those were ER numbers. She could work with ER numbers. What about Glendale? Lena asked. And I relayed the question. A pause. Then, Glendale is contested. We've had no contact from Glendale in 9 days. I'm not going to tell you what that means because I don't know for certain. But I can tell you that the 134 corridor is not passable, and the surface streets through Eagle Rock have been described by the one party that attempted them as... Hold on. Muffled conversation on her end. Then, as solid infected presence, no clear path. I'm sorry. I can only advise routes we've confirmed. Lena sat down slowly on the edge of the cot. Oliver moved to sit beside her without being asked. And she put her arm around him automatically. A mother's reflex redirected to the nearest child. That night, after Oliver was asleep on the cot and Tessa was dozing against the wall, Lena and I sat at the console with the screens dimmed. I'm going to Glendale, she said. Lena, I'm not asking. I'm telling you, so you know. You heard what she said. No clear path. My daughter is there. My granddaughter is there. Caulfield said no contact. That doesn't mean no survivors. It means no radio. Elena doesn't have a radio. She has a deadbolt and a hall closet, and my granddaughter. And she's waiting for me because I told her I would always come. I didn't argue. I didn't have the right. I'd spent 15 days in a Billionaire's shelter while Lena spent 15 days in a Billionaire's shelter thinking about a hall closet in Glendale. And the distance between those two experiences was the distance between comfort and agony wearing the same face. I'll take the G-Wagon, she said. You take the Range Rover to the coast. I go north, you go south. We leave at the same time. We should stay together. Joel. She used my name so rarely that hearing it felt like a door opening. You've been a good man in this room. Don't ruin it by telling me my daughter matters less than your route. I could hear Marcus Whitfield's letter in my head. Be the one. Don't feel guilty about it. Guilt is a resource leak. And I understood, finally, completely, that he was wrong. Not wrong about the math. The math was the math. Wrong about what the math was measuring. He'd been calculating days of survival. Lena was calculating something the spreadsheet couldn't hold. Okay, I said. Day 16. We left the safe room at 4 a.m., which the Haven cameras showed was the lowest activity period for the infected in our area. Not zero activity. Never zero, but something like a reduction in responsiveness, a dulling of whatever signal drove them toward sound and movement. Tessa had theorized it was neurological fatigue, that even damaged nervous systems needed periodic downregulation. I didn't care about the theory. I cared about the window. I'd spent the previous day preparing from inside the safe room, using Haven to stage the departure. I unlocked the garage doors. I verified fuel levels through the vehicle's integrated systems. The Range Rover was at 3/4, the G-Wagon full. I mapped the garage exit sequence. Interior door opens, vehicle starts, garage door opens, vehicle exits, garage door closes. 15 seconds of exposure, maybe 20. Lena packed a bag from the safe room supplies. Food for 5 days, water, the medical kit's trauma basics, a flashlight. I tried to give her the handgun. She refused. I've never shot a gun. A gun I can't use is weight I can't carry. Give me the tire iron from the garage. I gave Tessa the gun instead. She checked the magazine, racked the slide with a competence that surprised me, and set the safety with her thumb. ER in South LA, she said by way of explanation. 3 of the security guards taught me after my second shift where someone came in with a knife. Oliver was quiet that morning. He'd been briefed. Tessa didn't believe in shielding him from information, only from harm. And he understood the plan. He would be in the back seat of the Range Rover, buckled in, lying flat beneath a blanket, holding the hand-crank radio to his chest. His job was to stay low and stay quiet. He understood the job. The 4 of us stood at the safe room door for the last time. The air inside was clean and cool and recycled, and it tasted like safety. And I was surprised by how difficult it was to leave. Not because I was afraid of what was outside. I was. But that wasn't it. It was because the room had become something. A place where 4 people had negotiated sleep and food and fear and dignity in 400 square feet, and had managed it, mostly, without cruelty. That was worth something. Marcus Whitfield had built a box for one person's survival, and we'd turned it into something he hadn't accounted for in his resource calculations. A household. Lena, Tessa said, and then stopped and then just stepped forward and held her. They'd known each other for 12 days. They held each other like family because they were. The kind of family that emergency manufactures from whoever happens to be sealed in the same room when the world breaks. Oliver hugged Lena's waist. She bent down and put her forehead against his and said something in Spanish, too quiet for me to hear. Then she straightened and looked at me and nodded. And that nod was Lena. No speeches, no excess. Just the acknowledgement of shared weight. We moved through the house in a line, following the route I'd mapped through the cameras. Haven opened doors ahead of us and closed them behind. The house performing its final service, ushering us through its dark halls like a host seeing guests to the exit. In the garage, the 2 vehicles sat in the cold LED light, impossibly clean, impossibly intact, belonging to a world that no longer existed. Lena got in the G-Wagon. I helped Tessa and Oliver into the Range Rover. Oliver in back, flat, blanket over him. Tessa in the passenger seat, with a handgun in her lap and the radio frequencies written on her forearm in surgical marker. I got in the driver's seat. The leather was cold. The dashboard lit up with a constellation of information. Fuel, tire pressure, navigation, a cheerful display asking if I'd like to connect my phone to Bluetooth. I pressed the garage door control on the Haven fob. The door began to rise. Pale pre-dawn light leaked under the rising edge, and with it came the smell, the one you hear about from every survivor, the one no one describes accurately because the accurate description would require a new word. Organic, wrong, the smell of biology operating without the governance of a living mind. The driveway was clear. The gate was 40 feet from the garage. Beyond the gate, the street fell away down the hill toward sunset. I could see two infected on the sidewalk across the street, both motionless, both facing away. Lena pulled out first. The G-Wagon was quieter than I expected, its engine a low thrum that barely registered. She rolled down the driveway, through the gate I opened remotely, and turned north without hesitation. I watched her taillights climb the hill toward the intersection, and then she was gone. I followed, south. The first mile was the worst because it was the transition, the passage from controlled environment to open world, from screens to windshield, from watching to being inside. The Range Rover handled the Palisades descent well, its weight and low center of gravity keeping us stable on roads that were littered with debris. Abandoned cars, overturned trash bins, personal belongings scattered in patterns that told stories I didn't want to read. A child's bicycle on its side near a crosswalk, a suitcase burst open, clothes spread across the asphalt like someone had been packing when they realized there was nowhere to pack for. Tessa navigated. She'd memorized Caulfield's route and cross-referenced it with what she could see on the road atlas we'd taken from Marcus's study. An actual paper atlas, because GPS satellites were still transmitting, but the cellular networks that connected phones to them were mostly gone. Surface streets through Inglewood, the 110 South, Harbor Boulevard to the bridge. We made it through Santa Monica's eastern edge without contact. The streets were empty in the early light, the buildings closed and dark, and the infected we saw were distant. Shapes in parking lots, figures in windows, presences that registered on the periphery but didn't converge. The Range Rover's engine was loud enough to draw attention, but we kept moving. And I learned quickly that speed was our primary defense. They responded to sound, but they responded to proximity more. And a vehicle moving at 40 miles per hour was a sound source that passed before they could orient. Inglewood was harder. The streets narrowed. Abandoned vehicles created choke points that forced me to slow, to navigate, to sometimes stop and reverse and find alternate routes. Each stop was a window of vulnerability. And during one, a 3-point turn on a residential street blocked by a delivery truck, 3 infected emerged from a house 40 feet away and moved toward us with that terrible efficiency. Not running, but covering ground in a way that compressed distance faster than it should have. Tessa didn't shoot. She watched them approach, calculated, and said, 30 feet, 20, go now, you have room on the left. I hit the accelerator and clipped the delivery truck's mirror, and we were through. And in the rear view, I saw them reach the space where we'd been and stop, confused by the absence, turning in small circles like dogs who've lost a scent. Oliver stayed flat in the back seat. He didn't make a sound for the first hour. Then, somewhere on the 110 South, in a stretch of empty freeway that felt almost normal if you didn't look at the cars stopped in the northbound lanes with their doors open and their interiors dark, he said, "Mom, the radio is saying something." Tessa reached back and took the hand crank unit. She held it to her ear, then turned up the volume. Lieutenant Caulfield's broadcast, right on schedule. But this time, there was an addition. Be advised, bridge approach has new activity on Harbor Boulevard between Anaheim and the bridge on-ramp. Multiple infected, mobile, concentrated near the overpass. Approaching parties should maintain maximum speed through this section. Do not stop. Repeat, do not stop. We will cover from the bridge. Cover means guns, Tessa said quietly. Is that good? Oliver asked from beneath his blanket. It means they're watching for us, I said. It means they're ready. Harbor Boulevard was 6 miles away. The 110 carried us south through the industrial corridor between downtown and the port, past refineries and rail yards and warehouses that looked untouched. The infrastructure of logistics, built for machines, unattractive to whatever drove the infected toward concentrations of the living. The freeway was mostly clear. Someone, at some point, had pushed vehicles to the shoulders in places, creating a navigable center lane. Military, maybe, or early organized survivors, evidence of effort that had since gone silent. We exited onto Harbor Boulevard at 6:40 a.m. The sun was fully up now, flat and indifferent, and the light revealed the terrain with clarity I almost wished I didn't have. The boulevard was wide, 4 lanes, commercial buildings on both sides, and ahead, clustered around and beneath an overpass maybe half a mile distant, a mass of infected that stopped my breath. Not dozens, hundreds. They filled the road from curb to curb, standing in that horrible stillness, oriented in various directions, a field of broken compasses. Some swayed slightly. Others were motionless to a degree that made them look manufactured, like props placed by a designer who didn't understand how living things carry their weight. "Don't stop," Tessa said. I didn't stop. I pressed the accelerator, and the Range Rover surged forward, and the speedometer climbed to 50, 60, and the first of them turned toward the sound, and the rest followed in a wave. Hundreds of heads rotating like a flock, executing a turn. And then we were among them. The impacts came fast and irregular. Bodies against the bumper, the fenders, the side panels. The Range Rover's armor held. The windshield took a hit from something. A hand, an elbow, and spider-webbed in one corner but didn't breach. The sound was indescribable. Not the crunch of metal on flesh, but something wetter, more reluctant, as if the vehicle were pushing through a medium denser than air but less solid than what it was. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, on the narrowing corridor of asphalt between bodies. And I drove. Tessa braced against the dashboard with one hand and held the handgun with the other, not firing, understanding that the gun was irrelevant against this number and that the Range Rover was the weapon, the shield, the only relevant tool. Oliver was pressed flat against the back seat, the blanket over him. And I heard him counting under his breath, not from fear, I think, but because counting was what his mind did when it needed to organize experience into something manageable. 10 seconds, 15. The overpass passed above us, a concrete sky, bodies thinned. The road opened. I could see the bridge ahead, the Vincent Thomas, its suspension cables catching the morning sun, its deck empty, visibly, miraculously, maintained. And on the bridge, maybe a quarter mile ahead, a vehicle. Military, a Humvee with a mounted light, flashing, signaling. I could see figures on the bridge deck, positioned behind barriers, and I understood that Caulfield's cover hadn't been needed because we'd done it. We'd come through the mass without stopping, without slowing enough for them to mass on the vehicle, without giving them the 3 seconds of stationary proximity that would have let them find the door handles, the window seams, the gaps. I drove onto the bridge at 65 miles per hour and didn't slow until I saw the barrier ahead. Concrete jersey walls arranged in a chicane pattern that forced me to decelerate, to weave, to approach at a speed that allowed the armed figures on either side to verify that we were alive, human, uninfected, arriving. A soldier. National Guard, the uniform said. The face said something younger and more frightened. Approached the driver's window and shined a flashlight into the cab, even though it was morning. He looked at me. He looked at Tessa. He looked at the back seat and said, "Is someone under that blanket?" "My son," Tessa said. "He's 9. He's not injured. He's not infected. The soldier's face did something complicated and human. And he stepped back and waved us through the final barrier. And we rolled onto Terminal Island at 7:08 a.m. on day 16. And Tessa put her head in her hands and made a sound that was not crying, but was adjacent to it. The sound of a body releasing a tension it had held so long it had forgotten the tension was there. Oliver sat up. He pulled the blanket off his head and looked out the window at the island. The Coast Guard station, the generators running, the tents, the people. Living people moving with purpose and coordination and the posture of the uninfected, which I will never again take for granted. The way a living person carries their shoulders, the way a living person turns their head at a speed governed by curiosity rather than predation. "We're here," he said. "We're here," I confirmed. The hand crank radio in Oliver's lap was still on. As we parked and opened the doors and stepped onto solid ground, surrounded by other survivors, the radio caught a fragment of signal, an M band, weak, almost static. A voice I recognized, Lena. Not broadcasting to us, broadcasting to anyone from wherever she was, wherever the G-Wagon had carried her. "Estoy aquí. Elena, si puedes voir. Estoy aquí. Estoy viniendo. I'm here. Elena, if you can hear. I'm here. I'm coming." Tessa gripped my arm. I stood there in the morning sun on Terminal Island and listened to Lena's voice cut through the static, like a needle through cloth, precise and unstoppable, a mother navigating by the only signal that mattered. Terminal Island held 412 survivors when we arrived. By the end of the week, it held 431. The math of rescue moved slowly now, not because people weren't trying to reach the island, but because the routes were narrowing. The infected concentrations thickening around the bridge approach. The windows of safe passage shrinking. Caulfield's team maintained the bridge with controlled burns and vehicle barriers, and the kind of grim, repeating labor that doesn't make for heroic stories, but keeps the door open one more day. I was assigned a cot in a warehouse that had been converted to sleeping quarters. Rows of cots, military surplus, each one representing a person who had made it through something. I lay on mine that first night and stared at the corrugated ceiling, and felt the absence of the safe room like a phantom limb. The silence, the controlled air, the terrible comfort of a sealed door. Out here, the sounds were constant. Generators, voices, wind off the harbor. And beneath it all, the faint, directionless groaning from the mainland that carried across the water at night like weather. Tessa was absorbed into the medical team within hours. They needed her desperately. The island had 1 Navy corpsman and 2 paramedics for over 400 people, and Tessa's ER training made her the closest thing to a physician on the island. I'd see her crossing the compound in scrubs someone had found, moving with the focused pace of a person who'd found the thing that made the catastrophe bearable, purpose that matched her skills. Oliver was placed in a makeshift childcare arrangement with 9 other kids, supervised by a retired elementary school teacher named Dolores, who had survived the first week in a public library and still carried a book in her back pocket at all times. Oliver brought the Haven Manual with him. Dolores didn't question it. She understood that children choose their own talismans. I didn't have a skill that translated. I wasn't medical, military, or mechanical. I was a house manager. I knew how to organize grocery deliveries and schedule maintenance crews and maintain the interior environment of a structure built for a person who was never there. For the first 3 days on Terminal Island, I felt like what Marcus Whitfield's letter had told me not to be. Unnecessary. A resource consumer without a corresponding output. On the 4th day, Caulfield found me, Lieutenant Ava Caulfield was 36, compact, sun-damaged in the way of people who'd spent careers on open water, and she spoke with the flattened efficiency of someone managing a crisis that had no visible end. She sat down across from me in the mess area and said, without preamble, "You ran a rich man's house." "I managed it, yes." "You managed systems, supplies, schedules, people who came in and out, inventory. You kept a complex environment functioning for an absent owner." That's one way to describe it. I'm describing what I need. I have 400 people on an island with finite food, finite fuel, finite fresh water, and a supply situation that gets worse every day. I need someone who knows how to manage a household. This is a household. A big, ugly, terrified household. But a household. She slid a clipboard across the table. Inventory sheets, supply logs, rationing calculations. I looked at the numbers. I knew these numbers. Not the specific figures, but the architecture, the logic of consumption and allocation, the rhythm of maintaining a complex system for people who depended on it. I'd done this. I'd done this in a mansion for a man who didn't need it, and in a bunker for 3 people who did. And now, I could do it for 400. The man who built the room I was in, I said, he believed survival was a resource allocation problem. Was he wrong? He was half right. He got the resource part. He missed the allocation part. He thought allocation meant control. It doesn't. It means trust. You allocate to people you trust to use it well, and then you trust them. Caulfield studied me for a moment. "Can you start today?" I already started. I pointed to the clipboard. "Your water rationing is wrong. You're distributing evenly by head count, but you're not accounting for the labor differential. Your perimeter team and your medical staff are burning more calories and more water than your general population. If you keep flat rationing, your essential personnel will degrade first. You need tiered allocation." She almost smiled. "That's going to be unpopular. Managing a household means making decisions that serve the house, not the room you're standing in." I thought about Marcus's letter again. Be the one. He'd meant it as isolation. One person, alone, deciding for themselves. But there was another way to read it. Be the one who does the work no one wants to do. Be the one who counts the cans and divides the water and tells people the math, even when the math is cruel. Be the one who keeps the house running. Not for yourself, for the household. Lena made contact on day 22. I was in the supply warehouse, recounting canned goods for the 3rd time. Trust but verify, the only honest motto of inventory management. When Caulfield's communications officer found me and said there was a transmission I needed to hear. The signal was fragile, laced with static, but it was her voice. "Joel, this is Lena. I found them. Elena and Sophia. They're alive. We're in a church in Atwater Village. 14 people here. We have water, but food is low. I don't know if you hear this. I will try again tomorrow, same time." I sat in the communications room for a long time after the transmission ended. The operator, a young Coast Guard ensign named Park, watched me without speaking, then said quietly, "Atwater Village is on the other side of a lot of bad territory. I know. We can't send a vehicle. I know that too. But we can keep the channel open. If she can get to the 5 South, there's a route. It's not confirmed. But 2 parties have come from that direction. I asked him to broadcast our coordinates and the route advisory on repeat. He did. Every 4 hours, sandwiched between Caulfield's general broadcasts, a specific message. Lena, Terminal Island, Route 5 south to Harbor Boulevard. Bridge is maintained. We are here. I didn't know if she'd hear it. I didn't know if the church in Atwater Village had a working radio, or if Lena had found one, or built one, or convinced someone to share one. I didn't know if 14 people in a church with dwindling food could hold long enough to attempt a 40-mile drive through Los Angeles. I didn't know anything, and the not knowing was its own kind of room. Sealed, finite, and governed by math I couldn't control. But I did what I could. I managed the island. I counted the supplies and adjusted the rationing and resolved the disputes that scarcity inevitably produced. Who got the last antibiotics? Who got extra water rations? Who had to move cots when the warehouse reorganization freed space for a new medical bay? I became the person people came to with problems they couldn't solve and complaints they needed heard. And I listened the way I'd learned to listen in Marcus Whitfield's house. Attentively, patiently, with the understanding that most people don't need their problems solved. They need to know someone is maintaining the structure they're living inside. Oliver helped me. He'd graduated from the Haven Manual to the island's actual systems, and his mechanical curiosity turned out to be genuinely useful. He understood the generator maintenance schedule faster than most adults, and he drew diagrams of the water distribution system that Caulfield's engineers used for troubleshooting. He was 9 years old, and he was becoming something the island needed. Evidence that the future still existed in a form worth maintaining. Tessa and I talked in the evenings, brief conversations in the mess area after her shifts. She was exhausted in the way that medical professionals become during sustained crisis. Not the dramatic exhaustion of a single terrible night, but the erosive, cumulative fatigue of day after day, of need exceeding capacity. She told me about her patients in clinical shorthand that occasionally broke into something rawer. A man who'd been bitten and knew what was coming and asked her to hold his hand until it was over. A teenage girl who'd carried her younger brother for 11 miles and couldn't unlock her arms from the carrying position even after he was safe. "You did the right thing," she said one evening, "opening the gate. I almost didn't. But you did. And then you opened the safe room. And then you opened the car. Every time, you opened the next thing." Marcus's letter said not to. Marcus is dead. Yeah. The room didn't save him. It saved us. Because you used it differently than he designed it. She was right, and the rightness of it settled into me slowly over the following days, rearranging something foundational. I'd spent 11 months managing a house built on the principle that enough money could separate one person from every vulnerability. The safe room was the purest expression of that principle, a sealed, private, solitary pod designed to keep the world and everyone in it on the other side of 18 inches of concrete. And it worked. The engineering was flawless. The design was sound. The supplies were sufficient. But the design assumption was wrong. Not the engineering assumption, the human one. The assumption that the unit of survival is one. That the math works best with the fewest variables. That control means exclusion. The unit of survival is not one. It's the number you can carry. Lena arrived on day 39. Not in the G-Wagon. That had died somewhere on the 5, she'd tell me later. Fuel line damage from a collision she described only as necessary. She arrived in a church van driven by a man named Father Dennis, carrying 13 other survivors from the Atwater Village Church, including her daughter Elena, her granddaughter Sophia, and 11 people whose names she had memorized because she said that was the least you owe someone you've convinced to follow you through the end of the world. I was at the bridge when the van appeared. I was there because I was there every morning, checking the approach, counting the infected, maintaining the route the way I maintained everything. Methodically, personally, because maintenance is how I express the things I can't say. Lena stepped out of the van and looked at me across the bridge deck, and she was thinner, and there was a cut healing above her left eye, and her apron was gone. Finally, replaced by a jacket I didn't recognize. She was holding Sophia on her hip, and Sophia was sleeping. And behind them, Elena was crying in the way people cry when they've stopped being afraid, which is nothing like how they cry when they're in the middle of it. She walked to me and said, "I heard your broadcast. Every 4 hours, I heard it." I didn't say anything. I just stood there on the bridge in the morning light, managing nothing, controlling nothing, holding nothing together except the quiet conviction that a room is just a room until you open the door, and a house is just a structure until someone decides it belongs to everyone inside it. 445 people now. The math gets harder every day. The math was always going to get harder every day. I count the supplies, I divide the water, I keep the house.